Having celebrated virtually all of the events that are connected with the Christmas story throughout the octave before and after Christmas, even up to this feast, we've heard the story of the Annunciations to Zechariah, to Mary, to Joseph, to the shepherds on the night Jesus was born. We've heard the story of the Visitation, the journey to Bethlehem, the worship of the newborn Jesus by the shepherds. And now we hear today's story of the visit of the Magi. Traditionally, it's 3 wise men, but if you noted in the scriptures, they never actually tell you how many wise men there were. It just simply says Magi from the east. They had 3 gifts, but it doesn't necessarily say 3 wise men, but it's a grand tradition that we have in which we've even given names to them, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. And we've had very joyful stories, very joyous stories of the good news of the birth of Jesus. But if we were to describe the story that today's feast celebrates in one word, how would you describe it? When you really look at the details that are included in the story, for me at least, I think the most appropriate word to describe this story is nervous, unnerving, foreboding. Because it is, in fact, the darker story of the Christmas event. And both evangelists who tell the story of Christ's birth, in fact, do have a dark story connected to the Christmas event. St. Luke tells the story of the shepherds seeing the angel, the shepherds' visit to the child Jesus, but he also tells the story of the presentation of Jesus in the temple. And again, a very joyous story. We think of Simeon, the old man who was given a promise by God that God has now fulfilled, and he says, now you can dismiss me in peace, now I can die in peace, I've seen the glory of Israel. But we often overlook the other half of that oracle, except perhaps to remember the part that says a sword will pierce Mary's heart, because we have a devotion to the 7 sorrows of Mary. But that entire second oracle of Simeon says, this child is destined to be the downfall and the rise of many in Israel. This child will be the downfall and the rise of many in Israel. And the inclusion of Mary's heart being pierced, or more accurately understood, dissected by a sword, indicates merely that Mary would not be spared the effect that Jesus will have on Israel and, as we know, on the entire world. It's a rather foreboding story connected to the Christmas event. Not a happy thought that this child is going to rattle the cages and nothing will ever be the same again because of him. The same way we hear in the Gospel of Matthew. Not the story of shepherds visiting Jesus, but the story of the Magi. And we hear in Matthew's Gospel that, at least according to his story, the first people to recognize and worship the infant Jesus are not people of Israel, but foreigners, Gentiles, inspired by whatever the star symbolizes, are drawn to seek out this newborn King of the Jews. But what other details of the story are given to us? It is at the time of Herod, the king. Even people who would have heard this gospel for the first time right when it was written and presented would know Herod's reputation for ruthlessness. He is known as great for his great building projects, but he was known for his paranoia, his ruthless enforcement of his power, even though he was a puppet king of Rome, fiercely protective of that power, even to the point of executing some of his own children and a couple of his in-laws, who he thought might be a threat. And the first person that the Magi come to see is Herod. Any person who knows that history would immediately think, uh-oh, the wrong person to go and ask about the newborn King of the Jews. And perhaps when Herod, who the story says was shaken to his foundations, and with him all Jerusalem, responds to the wise men saying, "Tell me where he is, so that I may go and worship." A part of us might even be thinking, yeah, right. This is Herod we're talking about. And of course, in the end, at least as today's gospel concludes, the Magi received a warning not to return to Herod. So it ends with a sense something is wrong, and perhaps something terrible is about to happen. And as we know, it does. When the Magi do not return to Herod, he orders all young boys in the vicinity, 2 years and under, to be slaughtered. Certainly not a happy effect to the story of Jesus born in the manger. A very foreboding story of the effect of this child, even on innocents who had never known him, had never met him, and their families who didn't even know Jesus existed, being affected in such a way because of his birth. Just looking at the gifts that the Magi present to him gives us pause and is a sobering reminder of the identity and the destiny of this child. They present him with gold. Now, we here in the state of California, in which gold is very much a part of our history, with the gold rush in which the common man could come and strike it rich, filling his pockets with the treasures of the gold that is in them thar hills, that was not widely known among the people at the time of Jesus. Gold was not a possession of the common man, but rather a possession of the wealthy and especially the royalty. So in presenting gold to this child, the insights of the Magi recognize that this child was born in the line of kings. They presented him with frankincense. We all know what that is, don't we, folks? That's that smoky stuff that Father always uses at Mass and makes us cough. But if you were to look in the book of Exodus, in the chapter just preceding the worship of the golden calf, God provides in his law a recipe for making frankincense, along with a strict instruction, which perhaps might hit a little home in our post-60s world. This is not incense that is to be burned at home, in the tents or in the homes. This is only to be used as an offering to God. A very strict instruction on the use of incense. A reminder to us, folks, that when we use incense in the Mass, it's not about us. It's not even about me, the priest. It's not about us. It is about the worship of God, making use of a tradition that is older than Christianity itself, prescribed by God himself as a part of our worship. So you can imagine of how much thought we should really give to the people who cough up lungs every time they see the thurible appear, let alone get lit. This is not about us. It's about engaging in a tradition essential to the worship of God, prescribed by God himself. And these Magi offer as a gift to this child frankincense, a gift to a God. Finally, they present to him myrrh. Again, not the most optimistic gift to give a newborn child, because myrrh is nothing less than ointment to anoint a dead body. Now, yes, infant mortality rate was pretty high at that time. But with the insights of the gospel and the evangelist presenting this story, it is a sobering reminder to us that this child born in a manger will grow up to be the man who died on the cross. Even in these gifts, we see a sobering, nervous, foreboding reminder of who this child is. This is the story we celebrate today, which we describe in one word: Epiphany. Revelation. The revelation of God given to us in Jesus Christ, our King, our God, and the boy who grew up to be the man who would die on the cross for the salvation of the world. You look at just the feast days we've celebrated since the solemnity of Christmas, And we still see that same foreboding pattern of the effect that this child will have. The downfall and the rise of many in Israel and the world throughout our history. After celebrating with great joy the feast of the birth of Jesus in the manger on Christmas, the very next day we celebrate the feast of Saint Stephen, the first saint to be murdered, martyred for this child born in the manger. Just 2 days later, we celebrate the feast of the Holy Innocents, those young boys who were slaughtered by King Herod as a direct result of today's story. Even as far as the 29th of December, we celebrate a medieval saint, Thomas Becket, who was certainly the downfall and the rise of King Henry II, his one-time good friend who had appointed him chancellor, who became so frustrated with this bishop and his preaching and involvement in the name of that child born in the manger, that it challenged the king even in the political realm in the reign of England, to the point where the king said in frustration, "Will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest?" And 4 of his knights took him at his word, murdering him, Thomas Becket, during Vespers on the 29th of December. One of the greatest kings in English history, now second in popularity to the bishop who challenged him in the name of this child born in a manger. And so we're reminded in this Epiphany that the event of Christ is not always a bed of roses. The birth of Christ, while a joyous occasion, is an event that shakes the world and shakes the very foundations of our history as human beings. It is nothing less than the Word made flesh, the incarnation of God into our world. And the world has not been the same since. That is the revelation we celebrate today, of a child who was the downfall and the rise of many in Israel, who went beyond Israel and drew Gentiles to be the first to worship him, inspired deeply by the guidance of the star. Men who recognized him as a king, our God, and the man who would eventually die on the cross. How does Christ continue to be an epiphany for us in our world? How does Christ's event continue to be a foreboding, nervous message for our society? And we know there are plenty within it who find even the mention of Jesus very unnerving. We look at our history and see how Christ has constantly and continually affected the lives of so many people, many of whom don't even believe in him, let alone know him personally. How does that epiphany remind us that our lives must be an ongoing conversion and conformity to the gospel that he gave us, which at times can be very nervous and very unnerving, an upheaval for us who call ourselves his disciples? As we finish off these days of the Christmas season, let us be reminded of that great revelation, that great epiphany that is Jesus. And with the wise man, recognize him as the disciples we are called to be, as the man we are called to believe in, the child born in a manger, who was born a king, who is God incarnate, the child born in a manger, who grew up to be the man who died on the cross.